If you are not yet a subscriber to the Audrain Museum Network, you need to be, and do it now. Hi, and welcome to our exhibition here at the Audrain Automobile Museum, Colors, the Cars of Summer, presented by Lamborghini Boston. In today's segment, we're going to talk about sports cars. Now, when you think about summer motoring, sports cars are fairly high on that list, and who is sportier than our local Antonio Melegari, eh? Ecco
there
qua.
we go.
So, Antonio, we've got four in this segment to talk about, four very different sports cars that in some ways deliver a very similar experience. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So we're going to start with a car you know a lot about.
Not so much, but I'm here to learn from you, Donald.
This is a 1968 Triumph TR5 PI, not as in Magnum PI, but this is the last iteration of the car which began as the TR4 until it became the TR6. Now, this is a car an English car that I absolutely love. I had a TR4, and one of the reasons why I love this car so much, not simply because it's a really neat car to drive, but because, of course, it was designed by an Italian. Giovanni Michelotti designed this car, and I think that this car has such an incredible elegance of design for a very small car, and wonderful details that make it remarkably English and yet have that kind of detail that only Michelotti was known for, especially in a lot of his designs for Lancias and Ferraris and Alfa Romeos.
It has an Italian flair to it, for sure. Little things here and there.
And this is a time when the British manufacturers were doing their best to keep up with modernity. It wasn't very easy for them. They didn't have a lot of money at this point. The English car industry was sort of approaching the ropes by 1968, but they knew they had to keep up with the trends of the time, and so they needed to do things like, for instance, have independent rear suspension, which they hadn't had for a long time, and fuel injection. And this car has both of those. And it also has something which
Does it have Lucas Electrics, or?
Of course it has Lucas Electrics.
So they had to keep it pretty English sports car-like with that. Okay.
Precisely,
yeah, okay.
Exactly. And that's actually, one of the reasons why you drive a sports car, for the adventure. And what's more adventurous than setting off on a journey with Lucas Electrics?
Well, maybe it's not so confidence-inspiring, but it keeps it fun, that's for sure.
Exactly. And this car has a feature as well, which you and I spoke about before we started rolling the cameras, which I think that would surprise a lot of people in terms of its origins and what it means, and that's the top.
Yeah, I was looking at the Targa top, and I stupidly asked you if they took the Targa top design from a Porsche, and I think your eyes rolled so far back into your skull that the vibrations messed up the rotation of the earth, and there could have been a lot of problems. But that was very interesting that you told me that they did not, in fact, take it from Porsche.
Exactly. And in fact, this is not a Targa top. This is a Surrey top, invented by Giovanni Michelotti for an Italian car, a show car of the late 1950s called the Fiat Wonderful. And in the Fiat Wonderful, he did something which was very, very clever, which Triumph wasn't clever enough to do, which is the fact that you could take the removable hardtop section off and stow it in the trunk.
It's just like the Koenigsegg Jesko today.
Exactly.
Same thing, yeah.
However, Triumph, in their great wisdom, said, we need to have something that gives us a little more protection from the elements than a typical folding British soft top, which gave you almost none and was impossible to put up. So you had this rear glass window section that was bolted to the body. You could unbolt it, but it was very clunky in operation. I had, my TR4 also had a Surrey top. And you had this metal top portion that you took off with these knurled knobs, but it was too big to fit in the trunk. So you had to leave it at home.
Okay.
So you drove out in the car, and in case of rain, you had a vinyl sort of covering that you carried with you that would sort of protect you against rain falling directly onto your head. And it was just an absolute mess and expensive, and so it wasn't very popular as an option, and they didn't pursue it. And it took Porsche later to re-perfect what Michelotti had designed, which we'll see in a moment in a Porsche Targa.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
oh, sorry.
no, it's a great example of how often the British car industry snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, like I said, I mean, like you said, I'm not super familiar with this, but in terms of a design, I remember when we filmed this for Mansions and Motor Cars, which you can watch here, being in the camera car and seeing this come down the road in motion, I think this is a lot prettier with the top design, the way that they did it on this, than some of the other TR5s that you would see. And if I'm not mistaken, these are pretty rare as well.
They're extremely rare. They sold very few in the US market. Again, it was a stopgap model until they could get the TR6 ready.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's a beautiful car. And it's, you mentioned design earlier. It's pretty difficult to design a small car that is also not goofy looking. Like, this is not a goofy looking car. This is a very good looking car.
And it's so much fun to drive. Again, my preference is for the earlier TR4s with the beam axle. I think they handle a lot better than the independent suspension. And of course, it's always better to have, as the Brits say, carburetors than Lucas injection. But nonetheless, this is the car which is really rewarding in terms of the driving experience and the perfect accompaniment to summer on great winding roads. And even here on Aquidneck Island with low speed limits, you still get a lot of fun out of the driving experience when you're driving a Triumph like this.
Absolutely. I mean, the saying is it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow, and I think that this exemplifies that pretty well.
Exactly. Now, the next car we're going to look at, which has, in fact, a Targa roof.
Oh, perfect.
Exactly.
Get to talk about Porsche.
We'll talk about Porsche. We never do that in this network, ever. Let's talk about a Porsche.
All right.
So, having started with the Triumph, we are now concluding with the other three sports cars in the show. Now, I have to correct myself here, because the other three open sports cars in the show, because I know that people who have visited the gallery already and people who will come will say, what the heck was Donald talking about? 4 sports cars in the show. What about the Porsches and the Bugatti? Well, okay, the open sports cars. The true summer sports cars, if you will. We next go from the Triumph to our 1974 Porsche 911 Targa. And the Targa is a funny car because this is a Targa Carrera, and it's much like a game that some friends of mine and I had. We are members of a club called the F1 HCC, the Formula One Hairpin Cocktail Committee, and we'd all go to the Formula One race in Montreal and sit in Grandstand 24 at the Hairpin, and we had a little contest to see how many logos you could wear at one time. And well, you're unilogoed because you're totally millimilia, so that's fine. But you realize, of course, that quite proudly, Porsche used the name of very famous races to identify their cars because of the association of the success that Porsche had had. So you have the Carrera for the Carrera Panamericana and the Targa for the Targa Florio. So you have a car of 2 races.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I think they did a good job of marketing that and bringing their race car to the road. Of course, with the famous win that you actually did a nice piece on for the Porsche Club of America. I believe it was 72 was when they had that great win with the RSR where they were battling some of the much more powerful cars. And I think that's kind of where the magic of these G-body 911s is. They weren't crazy powerful, but they handled really well, and they were an incredible driving experience and gave the driver a lot of feedback and satisfaction.
Confidence and reliability is what really built their success.
And especially with the open top, to kind of get that wind through your hair and to experience the smells and the sounds. And you look up, of course you're not supposed to look up when you're driving, but if you're driving at night and you see the stars above your head, that really adds to the experience. This was, as you know, I'm a big Porsche fan, as I'm a big Ferrari fan. an '89 Targa was one of the first. I think that was one. No, it wasn't the first 911 that I drove, but it was of one of the first older 911s that I got to drive. And getting in that car for the first time and feeling the pedals from the floor. That was the first time I think I had experienced that, which was strange at first, but super satisfying as you would, go through the gears, and the lack of power steering, and they're very fun to drive.
A lot of fun, and I just have to take a step back because, of course, the Targa part came because the Targa Florio was the very first international race that Porsche won outright.
Yes,
in its history,
that's right.
Back in the 1950s. And so the Porsche Targa is also a fascinating thing. We mentioned, of course, with the Triumph that Giovanni Michelotti invented this removable hardtop. Porsche,
which
then,
I thought
of course,
they stole from Porsche. But
exactly, but Porsche actually enabled you to put your Targa roof in the trunk of the car, so you could travel with it. So in case the weather turned bad, you could put it back on.
The Germans are very precise.
Very practical. And of course, the first Targas also had folding rear windows because they were the substitute for the old 356 Cabriolet. And they didn't think they were going to make a 911 Cabriolet. Eventually they did after a very long wait. So the open air 911 was the Targa. And a lot of people who were passionate about the early Targas were very sorry to see the folding window go away. But I think that's more in retrospect than in period, because in period they thought, oh my God, we don't have to deal with a floppy thing and do this and the top, plus we get a nice rear defroster and it's all good. And of course today the Targas have a complete canopy that descends into the back of the car.
It's pretty wild.
Which is quite something. But this car in particular, especially, is such an incredibly summery car because it's got that wonderful plaid upholstery, which is just absolutely spectacular. And this sort of, it's not quite a bumblebee because the yellow is too cool a yellow, but it's got this incredible spirit. It's like an energy that the car has.
It's very inconspicuous.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, these cars are incredibly fun to drive. This car is an incredible blast to drive.
It is.
And for me, I really love the sensation. People talk about electric cars and what they mean today in terms of performance, certainly. But there's something about driving an open car and the feel that you get of hearing the engine, hearing the tires, the roar of the wind past your ears, and of course, blowing through my hair. It's it's something that you really can't substitute pure performance numbers for. And a car like that Porsche really brings it all together in a really brilliant way.
Oh, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, we're in front of us off camera, we're looking at the new 992 GT3 RS and the GT3, and those are very, very fun cars, but around here or on a local back road where you have a really engaging experience like this, every time I drive one of these G-body Targas, you don't care about anything else. You're just enjoying driving the car. It feels like you're going super fast. You might be doing 40 or 50, whatever it may be. But that really, every time I drive one, it really resets me, and I'm like, okay, this is what it's all about. It's very, very fun. There
in the moment and sort of connecting with what Porsche's essential nature is about. And speaking of connecting with the essential nature of a manufacturer and a model, here in the Audrain Museum Network, we also did some videos where I drove a modern 911 Porsche Speedster and this very Ferrari 550 Barchetta, looking at the fact that Porsche revived the legendary iconic Speedster name for a new model, and Ferrari did the same thing with the Barchetta. And we asked the question, which one was sort of truer to the original? I'll let you watch the video and remember what it is that we concluded. I shouldn't say we concluded, I concluded. Let's be frank about this.
I edited it.
But this is a car I know that means a great deal to you in terms of your experiences with Ferraris. And this is a car to me as well that, although looking at the size of this car, this is not a small car.
No.
When you get behind the wheel of it, you feel as if you are in a completely open vehicle there on the road. You've got no top at all. I mean, you have the little sort of emergency, if it's hailing, you want to protect the seats covering, but it's not a top.
No.
And
this is a good California car Southern California car where you're like, oh, it's not going to rain for the next 12 days, so I'll take this.
Exactly. I know I won't be caught out when I go to lunch.
Yeah.
But this is a car that just, again, what is summer driving all about? Summer driving is all about your senses and hearing the V12 and with the snick of the gated shift and these wonderfully encompassing but not strangling bucket seats. It's just an absolutely extraordinary experience.
This is a great driving experience, and you just mentioned the bucket seats, and we were just talking about Porsche. If you drive a modern Porsche with the bucket seats, you're kind of very upright, and after an hour they're pretty uncomfortable. But these have the ability to recline. So they're still racing style buckets, and they're beautifully designed seats, but these are actually super comfortable, and you could do a pretty long drive in these and have no issues. That being said, this is particularly special to me. This is one of the first Ferraris that I was very lucky to drive through this job. And like you said, hearing the clack of the gated shifter is incredible. It's one of those things that I've always been dreaming about, and then to actually go through it, it's awesome. It is such a great experience. And this is in my opinion, from a golden era of Ferrari. Michael Schumacher was winning everything, and he was winning championships and races. And like Jay always says, the last days of old technology are always better than the first days of new technology. The 550 was available with the flappy paddle gearbox, but I haven't driven one, so I can't speak on that, but I think the manual is probably the more fun and more engaging way to go with one of these.
More engaging way, certainly, and I am a big fan of the early F1 gearboxes. If you use them in the way that they were intended to be used, they're fantastic gearboxes. They are not the modern double clutch, paddle shifters that we have today. One of the other things I just wanted to go back to, the gated shifter. I know that for me, and for a lot of people that I hear this from, but certainly for me, when I first saw one, I thought, it must be absolutely impossible
to get your fingers caught in there.
Get this through.
Yeah.
And of course, the reality is that it is completely the opposite. When you know exactly where the gear shift knob is going, you can be so much more precise in your shifting, rather than wondering where it goes in this leather gator. It's like, there's something happening down there. I'm not quite sure what it is. And it also just makes you feel as if you are operating a machine.
You're exactly correct. The bond between man and machine in something like this is very evident. You really do feel a part of the car. And I mean, you know how much I love motorcycles and how much the rider has to use his body and inputs to make the motorcycle go. This is, in my opinion, very similar to a motorcycle because of how overloaded your senses get and how focused you are while you're driving it. I mean, they knew what they were doing when they made this car.
And everyone loves red Ferraris, but I think that a red Ferrari Roadster in the summer, I mean, come on.
You can't get any more summer than this. I mean, this is the epitome of summer.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And the last car we're going to look at in this segment, I think one of the fascinating things about this car is that it's a car that I have a personal experience with. I had a 1967 Mercedes 230 SL Roadster, which I bought shortly after graduating from college. And there is an ad up on the wall here in the gallery, which I absolutely love. And it says,
can you pronounce that for me?
Der Vergnügungsten Traumwagen.
Oh, that's what I would have said, okay, yeah.
Which is absolutely wonderful because it sums up the SL, the Pagoda SL perfectly. It's the sensible dream car. And when you think about the fact that for a very long time, these cars were very misunderstood. Following on the 300 SL and the 190 SL, people thought, well, it's certainly not a 300 SL because, you know, it's not got half the power of a 300 SL, and it's this very delicate car, and, you know, it's sort of like a new 190, but of course it was much more powerful than a 190. And people often forget as well that when those cars were new, they were also rallied. 230 SLs were rallied. They were very successful rally cars as well. And by the time you get to the 280 SL, the largest of the inline six cars, especially here in the US, they have this sort of reputation sort of as Beverly Hills cruisers, which goes to the advertisement about the sensible dream car, because they're actually cars that deliver very satisfying performance, but again, in a totally unhurried and unruffled way. They're not carrying on, so you don't have the idea that there's something actually happening here.
Yeah. Having driven a couple of these, I mean, for me personally, it's not my biggest cup of tea. But they are super comfortable and they glide down the road, and it's one of those cars you just put it in drive and you can just go. And I get the magic when I'm driving them, but it wouldn't be my first choice, but I get it.
It's a very interesting thing too, because of course most of these that were sold here in the US came with the automatic transmission. They were available with 4-speed and 5-speed gearboxes.
Very rare to find.
Very rare to find. And the interesting thing is that because of the way Mercedes wanted the power to be delivered in these cars with the automatic gearboxes, they normally started in second gear because they had that much torque. They could start in second gear easily. But it also had a very interesting, something which would become more common in the 70s and 80s. It's an automatic gearbox, but not a straight selector, as you see. It's got these little details because it's designed for you to be able to manually shift it if you wanted to, and so you could tell where the gears were. So if you hold it down in low gear, you start in first, and you put your foot in. These cars give very special performance if you really get on them. And most people don't think of using the car that way because it is so smooth and easy to drive.
Yeah. It has kind of a different two-tone nature to it. It's kind of like today where we have the cars where you can have normal mode, then you can put it in sport mode, track mode. This is kind of the vintage way of doing it.
Exactly, and it's one of those things that people often commented on the fact that, well, you know, here's this car is very expensive and it's competing against the top luxury cars in the US, but it's got wind-up windows. And Rudolf Uhlenhaut, the chief engineer of Mercedes, was famously quoted as saying, "If you can't reach across the car and roll down the windows, perhaps you should not be driving a Mercedes." And so
there you go.
I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And of course, the build quality is just absolutely matchless. And they're cars that just can go for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles without even blinking an eye.
Yeah, the quality is evident. I mean, you look at the interior and the fit and finish and the gaps. I mean, there's a reason why they've been around for as long as they've been around. I mean, they build a product that has a quality like no other. They do a good job.
And it's also quite interesting today when you think about high-performance Mercedes-Benzes. They have a very different character than this car. Yeah. And even the new SL, which is now a 2+2, when you think, okay, this is an actual
like
two-seater.
600 horsepower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very, very different kind of an animal. This car also comes from an age that I really miss. I understand why, for safety, we can't have it. But you had a two-seater car with space behind the seats for storage and a very good trunk. So you could go away on great trips in this car and really use it for, you know, the famous Donald Osborne, drive across the country. You know, you could do that with a car like this. And it could give you that effortless cruising when you wanted, or it could give you the spirited performance when you wanted as well. I think Mercedes really hit the nail on the head when they said the sensible dream car. And of course, this is one of the quintessential Newport cars of summer. You see so many of these SLs cruising around Newport in the summertime.
You can take the SL. I'm going to take the Ferrari.
I'll take them both. Horses for courses.
We'll have to fight over it.
Well, thank you for joining us here on the Audrain Museum Network for this look into our exhibition, Colors, the Cars of Summer, presented by Lamborghini Boston. We'd like to welcome you back here in the gallery to see the exhibition, or here on our YouTube channel, or on the Bloomberg Connect app. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.